Linda Sarsour joins us now. Linda, how are you? Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, brother.
Good to talk to you as always. How's the family?
Same here. Everybody's well. We're alive and breathing.
Good, good, good. Let me start this way. Do you get weary when things like what happened this weekend happen, and just because you're Muslim, you're asked to react to it? Does that get played out?
Oh, it's played out. I mean, absolutely. I feel every time it's like a cycle. It's an ongoing cycle. We go from one attack where you build up a little bit after that, and then another attack happens, and you get shattered back into pieces, and you got to work in between the next time this happens and build yourself and your community back together. I mean, it's a really unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in the same cycle every time.
Yeah, yeah. I think a question of greater concern, though, for me, is this soon after this incident, are you detecting, or the others in the Muslim community, detecting any greater degree of Islamophobia, even if it's something small, just the looks, the walking on the other side of the street, the stuff we go through every day anyway, even as black folk. But
Mm-hmm. Yep.
are you feeling that? Is that detectable right away after a situation like this? Have we seen that already?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the microaggressions. I mean, for
Right,
God's
right.
sakes, New York City thought that they were so, you know, coming into the digital age. They went and sent out super early in the morning, sending out a alert, emergency alert on everyone's smartphone. And here you are in a train station, looking like a brown guy named Ahmed, and all of a sudden people's phones go off. Everybody looks at their phone, and they got no information. All they know is warrant, we're looking for Ahmed, whatever his name is, Rahami, 28-year-old male. If you see him, call 911. I mean, that's the message that people got. As a matter of fact, on the Twitter account of the Arab American Association of New York, the Twitter account is Arab American NY. I sent one of my organizers to a conference rally down in D.C. called We Won't Wait, focusing on the voices of women of color. And she's out here in a rally on a podium in her hijab, speaking eloquently about her experience as a Muslim in America. And a white man came and heckled her during her speech, and people got scared for her safety. So you had a ring of women of color who were like standing around her while she's out here trying to put her voice out there and speak just like everybody else. I mean, and this girl's only 24 years old, and she had to experience that. This just happened yesterday in Washington, D.C. I got text messages of people telling me things like, walking down the street and they got spit at. I mean, people might be like, whatever, that's not really a big deal. But like, you trying to walk around in your city, you don't want people spitting at you as
Right,
you're walking down the street. Yeah,
right,
maybe they
right.
didn't physically assault you, but it's a hit at somebody's dignity and respect when you're walking down the street and someone's telling you go back to your country, we're tired of your people and all this other nonsense. I mean, it's really unfortunate that we keep going back into the cycle of collective punishment and basically blaming a whole group of people for the action of one guy. But that's kind of how it is in this country.
So to me, honestly, Linda, that's the only way that the question becomes relevant then, to even get a reaction from you and others in the Muslim community in terms of how it impacts you in that way. And then it really, to me, becomes a question of terrorism on several levels. Because when someone does something like this, he puts you and others in the Muslim community in a situation of being terrorized through microaggressions. And so again, this is another example when people want to say, well, this is the way of Islam. Is not, because if someone was truly a Muslim, they wouldn't do anything that would bring pain and oppression on fellow Muslims, would they?
I mean, brother, I posted about this today, and I said, the onus is misdirected. And the onus always seems to be on the 1.8 billion Muslims in this world to have to prove that our religion that we follow is not a violent religion and that it does not condone violence against civilians.
Right,
And I
right.
always tell people that that there are 99.99% of Muslims around the world who are already living and breathing proof of that. just imagine if 1.8 billion people in this world, right, almost more than 1/6 of the world population was going around engaging in violence. There probably wouldn't be a world for us to live in, right? So this idea that the onus is always on us to have to, defend ourselves or defend our faith, for me, it has gotten to a point where, first of all, I don't do it because it hasn't helped anybody in my community that has been condemning violence for the past 15 years. We're actually in a worse place than we were 15 years ago, even immediately after 9/11. And I always tell people that when these horrific acts happen, let us be American for a second. Let me be a New Yorker for a second, because that was my city. You don't know. I could have been hanging out at 23rd Street having a slice of pizza with my friends, or walking around shopping. That guy didn't know who was going to be there. I could have been one of the people hurt. It could have been my 8-year-old child in the back of that car that was hurt in that explosion. When 9/11 happened, there were 75 Muslims who died in 9/11. So what happens in these attacks is that people immediately forget that we are citizens of this city, citizens of this country, and that we too are directly impacted, and we too are horrified. So not only do I have to be horrified by the actual acts that I'm impacted by, regardless of who I am, because it's in my city, I'm also horrified because I have to worry about women in my family who wear hijab, or men in my family that look visibly Muslim, or people in my family that drive taxi cabs that might get into a car with somebody that maybe really ain't feeling Muslims that day, or are going to engage in some sort of retaliation. So people have to understand that it's real because it's happened. And this. I just spoke on your show 2 weeks ago. We had a 60-year-old woman stabbed to death in Jamaica Hills. We had 2 imams publicly executed in broad daylight after the afternoon prayer. 2 women assaulted in Brooklyn pushing baby strollers. Like, this is not some paranoia or some things that we think is going to happen. It's already happening. And I want people to understand that this is a reality that Muslims live in this country right now.
866-99-SIRIUS, 866-997-4748. What can be done about it? What can be done to change that relationship, or prevent the stereotyping and the generalization and the microaggression?
I mean, it all for me, it all starts on that local, neighborhood level. There's a lot of good people that live around us, checking in on your neighbors, being like, you okay, you all right, especially women that are wearing hijab. People just want to live. They just want to feel safe. They want to be able to go to the grocery store without people harassing them on their way there. But I think, Mark, there's a deeper conversation that we have to have as Americans, or as New Yorkers. We keep getting fed whatever we want to be fed by the media. Nobody questions, nobody challenges. And I'm tired of this cycle of violence that we continue to find ourselves in. And we keep talking about countering violent extremism and, countering terrorism. And I keep asking people, let's get to the root of the problem. What motivates these people to commit acts of violence against innocent people? What have we done, and what haven't we done? Why do we keep doing the same thing every time, expecting different results? We got a problem, and we have to understand why these things are happening in the global context. What the effects and the impact of the war on terror here and abroad. There are grievances. This is not a justification for violence against civilians, but in honor of those who have been either injured or have killed in recent terrorist attacks all over the world, we have to honor their legacy by getting to the root of the problem and preventing these future attacks from happening. And it looks like we're not doing a good job. I mean, this is almost every couple of weeks, every couple of months where we have one of these incidents. And it's really bothering me that no one's challenging the root cause of why we are dealing with this type of violence in our country.
What is the root cause?
I mean, the root cause for me stems from so many different places. And I mean, it stems from understanding our role as a superpower in the world. It stems from our foreign policy decisions in places like the Middle East. It stems from the war on terror and our continued criminalization and marginalization, ostracization and targeting of communities of color, in particular those who are Muslim or perceived to be Muslim. We cannot act like what we do across the world, our drone wars, we drone weddings, we drone gatherings of people because we're looking for that one terrorist, but then we go and kill 30 other innocent people, including one terrorist. You know what I mean? These people have to understand, Mark, people are human, right? So when you kill somebody's entire family or someone's people that people have an affinity to, people engage in retaliation. Is it justified? Absolutely not. And violence should never be justified, especially against civilians. The question is how to get to the root of the problem, right? We created instability in another part of the world. And I want to understand who's doing the research about why is a message that comes from a barbaric group like ISIS, why is that resonating with young men in particular in the West? Like, I want to know. I listen to video recordings. I see some stuff that people post online, and I'm like, them ISIS folks don't move me. I'm not moved by their message. I want to know what moves young men by their message. What kind of man or what kind of young people are actually being moved and inspired to engage in violence, and what is at the root cause of that? And there are some legitimate grievances, again, that do not justify violence against civilians that we have to get to the root of, right? Including in places like Europe. And we're watching this across the West, whether it be in European nations or here in the United States. I want to understand. I want to go to the story behind the story behind the story, not just the face value. He's Muslim. He read some stuff online. He got inspired. Boom, violence. Now we have to counter these young people who are reading stuff on the internet, and that's really as shallow as we go. There's something deeper than that we have to get to, and I think we as a nation haven't really challenged ourselves to get to that deep place.
Yeah, I agree with you. Linda Sarsour with us, folks. 866-99-SIRIUS. Because I think what we also find is that some of these young men are lone wolves, so to speak. So I think that's an important question. What would be attracting them to something like ISIL or ISIS? And then the reality is that really what's going on, or they think they are in an organization, or there's just something on social media they get attached to? Because it just seems to me that, even when you strip it all away, they just end up being by themselves and kind of left hanging out there. And am I on point with that, or what?
Yeah, I mean, the question is, look, me and you, Mark, can read stuff online. I've read, conservative blogs. I've read stuff that the KKK has written or put out, right? So the question is, what makes me and you different from these young men in particular who are reading the stuff online or being inspired by a video or a magazine that's written?
Yeah, right.
My thing is that let's think about, these young people. Where do they come from? What is their history? What's their mental health history? Like, what is their current economic status that they're from? Did they come from war-torn land? Have they seen trauma? Have they seen people executed? Do they blame the trauma that they've seen if they were not born in this country? Do they blame it on, quote, this world superpowers, and this is their way of dealing with, right, or retaliating, right? And oftentimes it does come a place of mental instability. But as you know, if you ain't white, that's unfortunately not something that anybody brings into the conversation. I can't remember the last time that any lone wolf, quote, Muslim terrorist, right, or a Muslim identified as a terrorist have we ever had a conversation about someone who had a mental health illness, or maybe we need to, look into their medical history. Immediately, you're Muslim, you're a terrorist, you're a criminal. That's pretty much it. Right. And I think that is something that we need to look deeply into. Do these communities need more social services, mental health services? What's unemployment rates? I went to Europe, and I told you this whole problem of terrorism. I think about when I went to France, and I go to these villages, right, which we would consider in the United States the hood. And these hoods are made up of predominantly North Africans and Muslims and Arabs, right? The question is, why is there a 50% unemployment rate? Does it mean because you ain't got a job that you should go out and commit violence? Absolutely not. But there's so many factors that play into why people get to a point of frustration and commit these acts of violence in different forms. So do we get to the root cause, or do we continue to walk around in cycles and circles and more innocent people lose their lives? So the question is, the responsibility is not just on the communities those people come from. The responsibility is on all of us, right, to make sure that we are looking at deeply rooted systemic problems in these communities.
Linda Sarsour with us, folks, as we talk about the aftermath of the New York bombing and solutions, things to contemplate, microaggression against the Islamic community in the form, pardon me, of Islamophobia. I want one category you didn't mention that I'm going to mention, and it's obviously controversial, but in terms of what moves these young men, we don't know how many of them, we don't find out until much later, Linda, how many of them, in fact, have been, and I want to use the right word, have been lured into these situations by undercover operatives of the United States in the first place. Because we know that happens, right? We know that people have been set up in situations. So, okay.
That's the majority of the cases. There's always an informant somewhere around there. I mean, we don't know yet in this particular case. That information has not come to light. But many of the, plots that have been foiled by both, supposedly by the FBI and the New York Police Department in particular, there's always an informant in there. You never know exactly what the extent of the participation of the informant was, but oftentimes they're really deeply involved, including helping to buy fake bonds and giving the quote aspiring terrorists, access to resources that they would not have had otherwise, or sometimes even doing things like with the Newburgh Four, right? One guy's brother was in a hospice looking for a kidney or something or a liver, and he was like, "You do this,
Right.
I give you $35,000."
Right.
There's people that
Right.
are willing to do whatever it takes for their family members. You know what I mean? So
Right.
we have to understand just the larger apparatus of this kind of counterterrorism work and the justification of the funding that these law enforcement agencies get. You got to come up with a product if you're going to get money. And sometimes we think that there are some plots that are created or manufactured in order to justify some of the funding. I mean, in this case, we don't have all the details yet, but we'll see what happens in the next few days.
So, right. And of course, we don't know the details. I'm not saying that's the case here, but we've seen that in so many cases, ladies and gentlemen. Quick calls, 866-99-SIRIUS. But to go back to the original point I made, though, Linda, is there a way or is there some discussion about trying to counteract some of this stuff on social media that's used to recruit people into violent behavior, counteracting it with other information on social media from the Muslim community itself that says, you know what, in the long run, you're doing your own community more harm than good, and are being used as a tool for the Muslim community in the end to be targeted by the government and by the likes of Donald Trump. Is there something? Is there a way? Are there ways the Muslim community is trying to get that message forward to young men?
I think that the Muslim community is really right now. First of all, I want to make a point that this is not an epidemic. We don't have young men running around our community being like, we want to be terrorists. And I think that even in this particular case, if you know, the father about 2 years ago actually had called the FBI on his son and said, look, my son's doing some stuff that's just not right. He's not straight. You all need to check him out. And supposedly within a 2 months worth of investigation, they came out and were like, we don't know, your son's clear. He seems like he's all right. So even in this case, the immediate family, the father had reported some behavior to the FBI. So this is something that happens across the Muslim community. I think what the Muslim community is doing right now is, we're trying to build resilience. We're trying to build empowerment. We're trying to make sure that the people in our communities have the services that they need, jobs that they need, affordable housing that they need, because that's really at the core of this, right? It's making sure that people have everything that they need, mental health services that they need, the support systems that they need, because people who will have jobs, people who will have support systems, people who have all their health issues, including mental health issues, taken care of, are the least likely people to engage in any kind of violence or crime. That's just a fact, right? So that's where we are. We try not to frame the way that we work in the community by saying, hi, everyone, we're going to do a workshop about how to counter violent extremism, because that's not how we're going to reach the young people in our communities. And I think that for me has been the most effective way to continue to allow our young people to feel engaged in our mosques, engaged in our communities, and being productive citizens of the society.
So, Linda, I want to just realize we both heard what you just said. The father called the FBI on his son. And then the FBI came.
Yeah, there's an art. This is all in the media. This is not.
No, I'm not disputing that, but just think about what that sounds like. The FBI had interaction with the son, with Ahmad, correct? The FBI talked to him.
Yeah, Yeah, the FBI took about 2 months. They supposedly investigated whatever the claims the father had, and the FBI themselves came back and said, your son is clear, your son's straight. So the father did his job by giving that information, just like many Muslims have done that, where personal family or community has given that information to law enforcement directly. So when people say we're not cooperating, oftentimes a lot of the leads that are given to law enforcement come directly from the communities that we're from.
Well, you know what I want to say, don't you?
You say it, brother, whatever you need to say.
I mean, your father calls the FBI. The FBI says you clear, and then you do something like this. So again, that takes me right back to the Newberg piece.
Yeah.
That's what's fishy to me. Your father didn't send him to you and me. He didn't say go see Linda and Masamela. He's called the FBI, and then they say nothing's wrong with him, and this still happens. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the Boston bombers. I mean, they were known to law enforcement before that incident happened. I mean, I don't know. Look, I ain't trying to blame nobody, but I'm trying to say that when people say that the Muslim community knows that we got these people amongst us and we're not saying nothing, it's just not true.